when we expand the spiritual bandwidth, what we're really doing is expanding our perception and reception of divinity, our perception and reception of life. So we're expanding that aperture, and it's largely based in our willingness, and it's largely based in volition and intention.
Charley, welcome to the show, and I'm super happy that you're here.
Thanks, Leah. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I always enjoy speaking with other healers and spiritual mentors and people of the sort. There's many of us, and yet sometimes it feels like there's not many at all. So
yeah, right.
It's nice to find connection with another authentic being. Charley, I think you live in North Carolina, correct? In Asheville?
That's correct. Absolutely. In Asheville, up here in the mountains. Yep.
Yeah, I love it there. It's such a magical place.
Thanks. It's a really popular place.
Yeah,
and it is beautiful. Beautiful scenery.
Yeah, it's nice.
Blessed to be here.
I want to talk about your name of your latest book is Expand Your Spiritual Bandwidth. And I want to just kind of open up the conversation between two people who work in the world of spirituality. You know, yeah. And just to kind of pick your brain before we start talking about what drew you into committing to a career in the spiritual world.
Okay. You want to talk about that now, in other words?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay. Well, sure. So interesting, because I was gravitationally drawn to spirituality and mysticism at a ridiculously young age. And I remember being a toddler and having inexplicable mystical experiences and intuitive perceptions when I wasn't able to even vocalize. And then when I came to about the age of 10, and I was an altar boy in the Catholic Church, and with a kind of resolve and swagger that probably would have made Winston Churchill shudder, I said to myself out loud, "It's time to get serious about my spiritual path." And I was 10 years old, and it just seemed normal to me. And yeah, from there, I was initiated into meditation by my eldest sister about a year later. I was drawn to all sorts of mystical aspects and information. So the career actually chose me. I didn't really choose it. So I didn't really feel like I had a voice in that. I just found that I wanted to guide people. And when I stepped on that path, it's like it just all started unfolding.
And the people were there. Well, you and I have a lot in common in that way. And I believe many young people have experiences of visions and intuitions and connections.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. But I too, it was very organic for me, but at the time I didn't really understand fully what it was. But I think deeper in myself, I kind of knew what the visions were and what the information.
That's great.
Yeah. And when I was a teenager, I think I was baptized like 5 times. I've been baptized in rivers across America, just walking down the aisle. Like
that's fantastic. That's great.
I know.
So you were like basically early on too, you really launched like a rocket and took off on the path, right?
Yeah. And for me, and I'm curious about for you, I would also consider myself a wounded healer, coming from experience of a lot of trauma. And not one particular incident when I was young, very young, but over the course of my younger years, for sure.
Right.
Did you have any of those kinds of experiences in your life that you were taking you down for a bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because just as magical and as fantastic as it was to enter this plane of spirituality and bliss and divination and all of that at a really young age, I also grew up with in an alcoholic household, and an abusive one at that too, that they often are, and then I lost my dad. So I lost my dad when I was about 10, and it coincided with that type of spiritual initiation and cracking the seal on my path. So that was a profound loss that, is obviously traumatic to any little boy or girl, but also just the war zone of what I grew up in. So I find now that it is amazing. We hear these stories, or even when I was a kid, people would say to me, "Oh, it's going to make you stronger and you'll have all this perspective and you'll be a better person for it." And of course, that's really cold comfort when you're young. But now it is incredibly paradoxical, because I find, wow, how would I have perspective about being able to overcome, let's say, resentment or abuse and all of these traumas and dramas that we live through. I find that I can really, I know from whence I speak when I work with people in recovery or from trauma and abuse. So yeah, it's amazing how we really do resurrect ourselves like phoenixes sometimes.
Yeah, and that's pretty much the symbolic image that I hold close to
Oh, that's
my heart.
beautiful. I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is. And I think it's important to continually talk about, one, the humanness of people who do spiritual work, and
Hmm.
two, that often the people that um, are very devoted, committed, and have that deeper sense of empathy and connection have come
Hmm.
from very difficult past. So I want to kind of try and knock down
Definitely.
this image of, people putting us up on a pedestal, or a minister up on a pedestal, or, or
Hmm.
these types, because we're we're in the journey. We've been in the journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I can always
Absolutely.
tell when I'm working with someone, for myself, who hasn't had a certain depth of
Okay.
trauma or incident or discomfort or something.
Interesting. Interesting. So you kind of feel a qualitative difference in their energy. Is that
I
how
do.
that works for you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. Have
Interesting.
you noticed
Yeah.
that at all?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I have. And I agree. I agree in the sense, like, it's very kind of subtle, and yet there's a real presence there, kind of organic presence of somebody who's, lived through the war, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a gravitas, I guess you could say. And but I think there's also, speaking to our field and our beautiful line of work here as kindred spirits in service, it's a tremendous opportunity for people to alchemically transform their lives.
Hmm. Right.
So once that happens, it's again, there's perspective that you never would have expected, that you could actually look back on it and understand that, yes, it doesn't necessarily validate the pain and suffering, and we're not looking to qualify that necessarily, but you can see what you've made from that dross, the gold that you were able to come across. I don't know that there would be any other way to advance so quickly for some people. So it's amazing how there's a type of spiritual maturation that can happen out
Yes,
of adversity and abuse. It's incredible.
it really is. And I appreciate
Mm.
you speaking to that. I often talk about, the experience of almost rewriting our energetic emotional DNA, our matrix, if you will,
Mm.
because we can't get
Right.
rid of the experience. We can't get rid of the memory, but through the process, I love the word alchemy that you use, and the process of transformation, transcendation. That's not a word. What is it? Transcend. What's the word that goes with
Well, there's
transformation?
transmutation. Sure. There's transmutation. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
There's all these processes that happen until eventually we feel like different people almost.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
remember the first time years ago when I went to my home state, and it was the first experience at that time where I felt completely different, untriggered, different
Nice.
smells, different perspectives, different
Right.
relationships. And I knew then, I said, something's happened. Something's really
Right.
settling inside. And to me, that's the beauty of doing the work.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's great because then you know that it's out of the abstract. Like, all of a sudden this becomes tangible. All
Yes.
of this truth and information and inner resources that we're accruing. It's like all of a sudden it's tangible, and it's like, yeah, it works. It works practically, and that's really important, that it's taken out of philosophy and embodied, right?
Yes.
So you got to feel that experience firsthand. That reminds me of a beautiful quote from Ram Dass, where he's famously said that if you feel like you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family.
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
so
Yeah. It's
to
so
that
true.
point, yeah.
And I love, I've been having this conversation kind of repetitive lately about the embodiment of the experience, because
Hmm.
dangerously so, in my opinion, for years now. And I believe
Hmm.
we're starting to shift away from it. But, the jargon that goes along with spirituality, the just, there's a sense of hierarchy about how you speak or what you do, and coming from different leaders and teachers and gurus and so forth, and not
Right.
enough emphasis on how does it feel? How does it feel
Right.
in our bodies? How are we grounded in this truth? Like, what are we experiencing differently than what we were 5 days ago, even though we've learned this fancy spiritual word,
Yeah, yeah.
So
I
it's a,
love it.
yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
big piece of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It has to work for us tangibly. I was fortunate, another like absolutely fairy book kind of story of my youth was I was fortunate to study with Sun Bear. You may have heard of him. He was a Native American medicine man that, in an interesting sense, was kind of a reverse missionary because he taught people of all descriptions and of all skin colors. And one of the things he famously said, I was 18 when I started my apprenticeship with him, and he was famous for saying this, was he didn't want to hear about a philosophy unless it grew corn, meaning it has to bear fruit, right? So I think there's something so gorgeous about that, where we take it out of the abstract and we concretize the experience, and it's really embodied, So yeah, it's a magical process, and I think it requires a lot of love and a lot of patience with ourselves, because people often want to just jump right off from the kiddie pool. They want to jump right into the, the depths, the deep end.
Right.
And I think there's a process of being able to get ourselves geared up to receive the divine. And I like to say that there is no self-realization without self-regulation.
Mm.
So I think that self-regulation is a huge component to our path, to our empowerment.
Yes, I do too.
Right.
When you were speaking, I was thinking about, because I used to have a healing center and I would sell, all the paraphernalia, and
Right. Right.
including
Right.
crystals and oils and all that kind of stuff, which I love.
Mhm.
I love those things. People would continually,
Me too.
buy them in order to try to fix a problem. And I would have to remind them, these
Good
are
point.
subtle tools. These are tools
Right.
to be used to help enhance and restore a harmony within ourselves, but they're not magic. They're not magic stones. They're not just gonna,
Mhm.
by having hematite is not going to change your life.
Yeah, that's
And
a
it's that
great
same,
point. Great
yeah,
point.
it's that same kind of idea. It's like utilizing and assimilating and
Mhm.
relying on our own inner strength and information, intuition and connectivity into
Mhm.
that which already is, instead of waiting for something to come just shower us with
Yes.
a fix or a patch or a
Beautiful.
healing even, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Beautifully articulated. That's like, I absolutely concur. That's really it. I think we have to show up and be proactive about our evolution. It doesn't, I mean, that's the thing. We get to show up for ourselves, and we get to engage. Well, we get to be the curators of our consciousness, and we get to engage our evolution, and our spiritual path is very much DIY. I call it DIY soulcraft.
Oh,
And yeah, it just a nice way of thinking of it is like, well, if we've gotten ourselves into hot water with all of our neuroses and this and that and the other, certainly there's a way to reverse that, and there's a way to come back to that balance.
mhm.
And you were just speaking to that. I love that. I think we've been sort of conditioned to believe that it's always exogenous, like the answer is always external, it's always outside of us. And such a good point, because if you were to work with those tools with the proper receptivity and the proper consciousness and self-love, then of course the whole thing becomes catalyzed,
Yeah.
instead of it just being an inert kind of substance that we may depend on to change our state of being. No, I think we're responsible for our state of being.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And the salt lamp is beautiful, and it will emit a
Mm.
small amount of those negative ions to help reduce the charge in the room, but it's not going to, again, solve
Right.
all of the inner conflict and that separation that we feel. So thanks for sharing
Absolutely.
that. And speaking about
Absolutely.
phraseology, I love the title of your book
Oh,
because,
thank you. Thank you.
yeah, it's a great title. And
Mm.
one of the reasons I love it is there's so much, and I'm guilty of this too, talk about spiritual growth and even the sense of evolution and awakening and enlightenment, and this
Mhm.
the hierarchy of going up, 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 and it comes kind of with a judgmental sense of I'm not enough where I am, or I need to be more spiritual, this kind of thing. But that the idea of expansion, I teach a lot about
Mm.
expansion and the bandwidth. I think that's something we can all resonate with, especially now that we're surrounded by hundreds of G's of frequency every day.
Yeah, that's right. Right. Now we got to counter all of that
Yeah.
EMF and sort of artificial energy, or certainly it's a how can you say it? It's a modified energy that's not necessarily an organic presence.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's there. But thanks, and it is a nice way to look at it. It came to me just naturally that that's what we're up to. All of us as spiritual seekers. I think now we are part of a mainstream. We're part of a global collective of people that are awakening. How exciting is that?
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
know.
all these years, a lot of us felt like we were just sort of in the back bedroom, or
Right.
you know, that like in some places, like healing and doing readings has actually been illegal. And I know in the beginning of my career of being a clairvoyant, it was actually illegal in this part of North Carolina. And gosh, what a strange aspect of a kind of undercurrent of persecution
Yeah.
was palpable.
Hmm.
And yeah, not to get too far into that, but just to put a bow on that, I read for the mayor at the time and other important people, and they were all like, "Charlie, don't worry about it. You're going to be fine," and it worked out. But anyway, speaking to your point, expanding the bandwidth, I see that as when we expand the spiritual bandwidth, what we're really doing is expanding our perception and reception of divinity, our
Hmm.
perception and reception of life. So we're expanding that aperture, and it's largely based in our willingness, and it's largely based in volition and intention. So
Mm.
that's an internal command, from the soul to the mind-body complex of like, hey, let's not sleepwalk through our life. This is a miracle. Let's be present to it. Let's celebrate it.
Yeah, and correct me if you disagree, but and I think you do agree, but we all have access to it 24 hours a day. It's not
Mhm.
like we have
Absolutely.
to, right? Yeah, it's not like we have to
Absolutely.
stop the life we're living and then somehow, have that idea of going to the ashram or to India for a year or what have you. We have access to it 24/7. It is an innate
Mhm.
part of our being. In fact, I would dare say, it's the majority of our being in this physical vessel. And yet
Mhm.
so many people have lost touch with it. And where do you think
Mhm.
that started? Or what do you think that uh,
Mm.
is it
Mhm.
is it kind of the eating the apple from the tree being realized, we're born and then we get a sniff of what it is to have and to
Yeah.
feel and to
Right, right.
power, and then we're off.
That's a mighty question, a gorgeous question. And I agree with you wholeheartedly as well. I mean, of course it's available, it's ubiquitous. It's not only this presence, this divinity, it's not only, you know, it's thing, it's all, it's everything, and it's also
Everything,
nothing. Right. So there's nothing that it's not. Even
right?
the nothing or the dark matter or the dark energy or the space or akasha is absolutely divinity. But to that question, wow. I'd love to approach it this way, and I'll try to put it in a thumbnail sketch if possible, at least from my perspective. Um, I think that we're here. We basically have chosen to separate from singularity, into this plane, obviously, of duality, of contrast, and into a three-dimensional plane and world, so that we can experience and express love, and so we could have a dramatic expression and enact our consciousness. So there's that aspect of it, I think, in the bigger picture. And that could be argued, well, that's just a belief, but it's also my experience that there's some element of us having chosen this experience. Like, okay, since I'm unlimited, since I'm connected to singularity, everything is one, it's all one great quantum reality. What's left? What else to experience, right? So the soul just says, well, oh, there's one other thing. Have an experience of being limited, have an experience of being in form.
Mhm.
So we kind of go into this, what I think of as a spiritual amnesia, Maya, or this sense of separation. And but therein, I think the plot thickens because in the contemporary uh, situation for modern people, basically what we're looking at is, I think, the forgetting of our divine nature is more attributed to this particular aspect, this particular bugaboo, which is we've become so identified with our thoughts and feelings that we've become our psychological reality. So, yeah, whether it's cultural conditioning or otherwise, or just the process of being informed and being tossed about in the school of hard knocks, we become so identified with those thoughts and feelings that we think we are our thoughts and we think we are our feelings, and we forget that there is a thinker behind the thoughts and a feeler behind the feelings. So that one important distinction seems to be a dividing line, or like kind of a demarcation point of consciousness, because once we become the drama, it's kind of all over but the crying, because then we're so identified with this, just the realm of the senses. And that's really, I think, where there's a major disconnect, at least for people in the modern world.
Yeah, and it makes total sense. And a lot of people in the trauma healing world would look at, the separation of the umbilical cord as that first experience of trauma and separation and fear that takes over. And so one of our first initial emotions that we have after the birthing, or maybe even during the birthing, depending on how that goes, is terror,
Right. Yeah, great point. It's a great point. Absolutely. It doesn't get more visceral or, physical than that.
Yeah, it doesn't. But it'd be curious. And of course, we will never know this in our experience here, but it'd be curious if after that experience that we had, a pristine kind of element of nurturing and love and connectedness with our family unit, with people without the words and the drama and the feelings, in a safe environment. I wonder how our experience may have unfolded. And I don't know why I'm bringing that up right now, other than just the curiosity of the impact, as you're saying, of this limited experience that we had that becomes so filtered by our thoughts and our feelings, that pretty much overtake us,
Yes. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
It's most people's goal is to try to quiet their mind and try to, process their feelings, and then what though, and then what, everyone says they want to do it, but on the other side of that, there's a different way of being. And I think a lot of people are terrified of that freedom, the freedom of limitation.
That's such a great point. There's such a great point. One of the aspects that I love to speak to is that resistance on the spiritual path. It's like, it's such a big deal. And when we're in resistance, we're neither releasing nor receiving. It's a state of existential inertia. And so we know that, okay, here's resistance. What do we do about it? Well, there's a lot of different approaches. And I think that one great reframing that seems to depress the emergency brake, it's like it releases the brake, is to reframe the path, reframe the spiritual path psychologically, from looking at it as drudgery and responsibility to opportunity and potential. Okay. So the words will even sound refreshing to people, like, yeah, that would be great. But then if you actually had an experience of it, an embodied experience of that, which is to say, instead of like, okay, I've got to do it and I've got to meditate and, oh, I've got to ascend and I got to evolve and I'm not quite enough and let me ace ascension and all of that. Well, what if you looked at it like, I don't have to, I get to.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you get to, you don't have to, you get to. And that, it's amazing how that little, it's kind of like a trick of the brain and a little bit of a psychological shift. If you hang with it for a minute, what happens is your soul goes, that's right. Because I'm really big on what I love to call original bliss, because I feel that we come in with original bliss. It's not like we have to fabricate it or somehow augment our being. But specifically, think of it in the human experience, there's three things that nobody has to teach us. Like they have to teach us how to blow our nose and how to tie our shoes and ABCs, but nobody has to teach us how to laugh, how to smile, and the driving force or the kind of prime directive of youth. And I think let's push this point for humans across the board of all ages is to play and to rediscover that playfulness in life. And that often can be seen as like sort of out of the box of spirituality, but I beg to differ. I think that play is at the heart of this experience of awakening and spiritual evolution and consciousness. So because play is just primary, nobody has to teach us that. So I love to say that we're after doing from a state of being versus being from a state of doing. And that's an old concept, but if we're and very kind of Asian in style. But the way I articulate that is like, okay, really, let's seed into that and find out, what does it mean to do everything we have to do, all the karma yoga, all of the obligations. But if we were to do it from a seated state of being, of bliss and ecstasy and joy, how effective would we become? How much brain coherence would be exhibited? Quite a lot.
Oh yeah, it'd be
yeah, we'd be supercharged, and I think that's what we're designed for, really.
Yeah,
that's our human potential.
Yeah, and the frequency of that is so much higher than the frequency of, that the pain points, the connection to the core wounds, the misery, the self-loathing, the humanity of the emotional state. And so I'd love that you talk about the state of bliss, because last year I did a workshop on finding your innate joy. And
great. Yeah.
And it was very much based around the same thing. But, in a very, foot to concrete kind of way of exploring, people exploring what actually turns them on, what makes them happy, how do they access that feeling of fire and excitement and just happiness, joy, is different from happiness, but, that state of joy. And after we workshopped it through, and get to the point of remembering as little children, that state is, you're born into that state, you have the tears with the umbilical cord and the crying when you're hungry. And outside of that, you are laughing and smiling and observing and in a state of joy and bliss. Yeah. So I love that. And I think it's so, when I forget to play, I was just going to say, excuse me. And I think for a lot of people, especially through this pandemic, forgetting to play has been a big thing, because, okay, we'll play solitaire, we'll play the games, we'll do a little bit of this and do a little bit of that. But that sense of unbridled freedom and joy that comes from that has been dampened so much in the past couple of years. And so even more reason why to have this conversation right now. And
absolutely. Great point. That's just such a great point. Yeah. So I was just going to say, it's fantastic that you're facilitating that for people. That's, that's true. That's a profound contribution to humanity. It really is.
Thank you.
And the results of which are obvious. They're explicit as much as implicit. And I think people tend to feel like, at the end of the day, what's the value of that? You just go back to your seriousness and whatever. Well, not if you awaken an instinct that's been dormant, right? And that's what you're helping people do.
Yeah, true. I'm trying to embody that and accept it on social media. Because,
and this is a great conversation, because I have a bit of a, let's just say a bit of a skitsy relationship with social media.
Me too. Yeah. And so I want to talk to you about this.
Bless its heart.
I want to talk to you about this. Right. It's because it's really interesting. So for myself, and I don't know about you, but I have an idea of who you are, just, seeing you in your environment and so forth. I have a very artistic, I'm an artist. In fact, I would call myself a healing artist more than a spiritual teacher, just because I resonate with that more. And so I'm trying to not get on the bandwagon, because I really have to stay true to why I'm doing what I'm doing, without trying to do what everybody else is doing in the world, financially, and my work, everything. But like on Instagram, I've been very frustrated lately, because I have this skitsy relationship with it, and the whole, wanting to reach more people, wanting to have the positive attributes that come with the bigger following, and also not caring at all and fully trusting that the people that are supposed to find me will find me, and all that kind of stuff. So it's this kind of vacillating space within myself of being a human and being on Instagram, and also doing my spiritual work, and, the path that leads to, and so forth. But anyway, so to speak of the joy, I started doing reels, the Instagram reels, like the TikTok videos, but
okay. Reels. Got it. Yeah. Sure. Okay.
And there's an artist part of me that comes out in it. It's uncomfortable, because it's almost like revealing this part of myself that a lot of people don't see on social media, that only know me that way from a spiritual or author or what have you.
Right,
So,
right.
but I'm trying to get into it and make it fun for me, as like just a form of expression.
Right,
But
right.
this, I guess the conversation is the challenge of freeing up all parts of ourselves that aren't connected to any type of identifier, and just in the beingness, and also giving yourself permission whether judgment or without force to have fun, whether you're making reels,
Yeah,
whether
what a
you're
concept.
whether you're cooking dinner,
Yeah,
whether you're
fantastic.
leading a workshop, whether you're a car mechanic, whether you're whatever, that to break through the barriers of what it is to be this, that, or the other thing, what it is to have a lot of followers, what it is to not have a lot of followers, what it is to be a school teacher, what it is to be an ER doctor,
Right, right, sure.
and how do
Yeah.
we enjoy all the parts of us, even though we are so attached to the labels and the identification and the perception of how people look at each other, especially on social media. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about social media and how you manage it, but that's kind of where I am, and it's still a vacillating. I hate it, I love it, I need it, I don't want it, I want to get off of here. This is helpful to me,
Right, right.
and this is helpful to a lot of people. Even if I just affect one person, I've done my job, that whole thing. What is your experience and relationship with social media?
Great conversation. Sure, I'll try to speak to it, as best I can. Well, first of all, let's understand that it's a relatively new phenomenon. I have, for instance, if I'm like connecting with somebody in a podcast or have some sort of media opportunity, it never occurred to me that people would say, okay, well, what's your following, and it's like okay. And so I see that of being importance now, but I've never really allowed it to be important. And in fact, for me, it's really they're false metrics because most of my clients have never wanted to really be connected necessarily to looking me up on social media and that kind of thing. It's just like most of them are not connected or even interested. How do I express to somebody like, okay, well, I have like something like close to 70,000 people that I've worked with in sessions over the last 27 years. And there's probably, a few likes on a video or whatever that I have. It has no relation to the people that actually follow me, that know about me. And and plus I was connected to all of that in media, and, whether it was really big things like New York Times or Huffington Post or news or whatever, but when people really kind of had to earn it back in the day through reputation, all of that happened through reputation. Yeah, I never knew about like paid interviews or anything like that until recently, and it kind of blew my mind to hear about that stuff. So anyway, social media, I just I have a presence on Instagram. I don't really know much about it. I don't spend any time on it. I just have it open. I have where I do put a little energy is my Facebook private group, which is the Charley Castex Guidance Lightline. And what I do is I go in there and I contribute. I just contribute, and then I'm off to my other projects and things. So I post, I'll connect with people if I can. And then the greater fun has been doing these Guidance Lightline programs. During the pandemic, the last couple of years, I've been doing these free programs for, again, spiritual seekers in our global community, where we connect through this virtually through, say, Zoom call. And I answer questions and teach and provide support. So that's been great. But social media as a phenomenon, I think it's going through a lot of growing pains. And for me, it's not, it's something I did spend a lot of time on when it first started, for instance, with MySpace. I had just moved to Hawaii. MySpace had just started. So this is like all back in, 07, 08. I spent a lot of time on it because I had such, I felt like such high hopes that I would connect with people all around the world, not even professional. I just wanted social, And that was pretty satisfying, but I think it just started changing a lot. So my best approach right now is to contribute and and receive some messages. But largely, I'm very much of the mindset of, like, I'm big on starving distractions and feeding your passion. And I'm big on what I take in as a diet in terms of visual information, especially at the points in the day when the subconscious mind is most available. So I'm big on championing, where intuition meets human potential and empowerment. That's really where I'm blessed to be, in that intersection. So too much information that's very dissonant and polarized and sensational, it's not really attractive to me. But there is so many great conversations. There's so many great groups spiritually, and like yourself, you're out there with your presence. It's making a huge contribution, and I know it. I've been watching your videos and loving them. So that's where I think it's great. Yeah, it's like YouTube, a little longer form, I think gives more.
Yeah, there's a and I just wanted to have this conversation because I know that I'm sharing from my gut how it feels to do reels and posts and all that kind of stuff, but for everyone, as you said, it's a new phenomenon, but it's so ingrained in us so quickly. And how people are going there for their information and for their entertainment and for their judging of self and comparison of others. And so, so there's this, it's a really split world of value and human disintegration almost, and
potentially,
potentially. And, for anyone who's listening that is maybe trying to grow their presence, there's nothing wrong with trying to grow your presence. But I think more importantly, look at, what we're putting out there, why we're putting it out there. And, and that undercurrent of trust of why I'm doing what I'm doing, and that the people that can be supported by this will be, and there's no reflection on self, to
beautifully said
feedback, right? Because it's really jamming a lot of people up,
yeah, that's such a great point.
And I never gave it a lot of attention, and then I got upset because this part of me that was unchecked, unawakened, I just got frustrated when I started seeing other people in the industry, or in the same kind of, where they would skyrocket and be making all this money in these programs and these courses, and they have hundreds of millions of followers, or not that many, but they've really put all their intention to it, where it's supporting their life. And I think I've been doing this for 25 years, and I didn't jump on this bandwagon. But like you, I'm constantly reminded, I'm constantly grateful that, the people, there is also a real world happening out here of support and resonance and energetic matching, and that has supported me, and people have showed up, and I show up for the people. I don't sniff out my healer on Instagram. I find them in the world, right?
Right. I think you've said it all. It's like, it's kind of a neutral commodity that can become very neurotic, and people can get all entangled with that heavy identification, like you say, and kind of judging their value, or paying way too much attention to the metrics. So for me, I it's funny, I have a younger friend, and I was, still kind of, he's of the generation, in the digital generation. And I told him not too long ago, I was like, it doesn't matter to me really at all. And in the bigger thing, in the bigger sense, I just want to be a part of it in some way. And I think it's kind of funny because I'm this mysterious presence, and yet I'm really not. So because I'm not into trying to push that. But to that point, I just said to him, like, it doesn't matter. I don't want to really, I'm kind of pulling out of that direction and doing other directions. He said, wow, you've cracked the code, like somebody that can do it without social media. And I said, I think that we're under a false illusion, because I'm with you. It's more about, you, like you say, you don't sniff out your healer. People really, it's like talent is outed. So if somebody has their heart in the ring and they're on fire with what they're here, born born to do, you know, it's like that people will discover them and they'll go, hey, that's real. And authenticity speaks volumes. You know, I really believe that's the currency that'll be around way past social media. So it's kind of going through all of this, a bit of a seizure, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But we can find each other, and I think if we're discerning, and we also have the proper relationship with these, you know, with these formats and these platforms, the proper relationship where it's not a looking glass to appraise your worth and your value, and it's not a popularity contest. So I mean, it's basically what I'm saying. I think that is a really damaging idea because again, it just doesn't work the way, and I'm not the only voice in the choir about this. I mean, I've even heard Seth Godwin, you know, or Seth Godwin, who's, you know, I think a fantastic speaker and a brilliant mind, and he teaches about marketing and all of that. And he talks about the idea of false metrics and says, look, he's even said it, if you check out some of his podcasts, all you need is, I think he said, you know, 1,000, 2,000 people, which is a lot really, who love your work and understand what you're about, and they resonate, and you will do your thing, you know? And in my experience, that's really true. I'd pay more attention to becoming and contributing and less attention to the popularity contest, because it's very fleeting. You don't want just quantity of people. You want the quality of people that resonate with what you have to share.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. It's so true. And I hope anyone listening that struggles with this, you know, can take a deep breath into this notion. Absolutely. Even though we all, you know, a lot of people talk about it, how big of a time waster these things are, and how damaging they are for our part of our psyche. But, you know, I just wanted to have the conversation because it's a real thing going on. And
yeah, it's very timely. Yeah. And different too. I haven't heard that discussed really in a lot of spiritual podcasts. So I know it's a different question for me to get. I would say probably a year or two ago, I wouldn't have answered it, you know, but it's like, all right, I'll take a pot shot at it. I'm definitely not against it. I just think it's a potential that, like everything in life, it's a reflection of your consciousness. And I think it's a really great opportunity for us to be more and more conscious. And I'm interested in unicity. So we'll connect, but let's remember what's important. It's the connection ultimately.
Yes.
You know, that's the real commodity. And it's not, we don't want to become bean counters where you become neurotic about, you know, that I think that's a sickness basically, like that's all the way back from Madison Avenue. Thankfully, even, you know, millennials now, young people now, I think they see it. They know the difference between fool's gold and real gold, and they may be going through their growing pains, looking through the digital looking glass, but you know, they're even more discerning and more connected to empowerment and authenticity. Like they're yearning for it like never before. So it's really going to, I think it will evolve if we stick with it and use the tool consciously and intelligently.
I agree. Yeah. Unfortunately, the media, including publishing and music and so forth, you know, they're very much based around numbers and very much based around this kind of influence. For now, you know, we'll see. Silly. But it is. But we have to remember, especially like spiritual teachers that, you know, you and I came up with, Ram Dass, Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay, you know, all these people, they didn't have hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, you know, and yet, absolutely. And yet their work penetrated the lives of millions of people all around the globe. So that's it. Yeah. You mentioned a time. I want to change the topic now completely the other direction, but I'd like you to talk to our listeners about that time of available subconscious when that is open, and what do you do in your practice for that time period?
Sure. So in Expand Your Spiritual Bandwidth, which is basically a roadmap for spiritual seekers, in my book, there's 14 different empowering strategies that basically sync the spirit, mind, and body. So the fifth strategy connects to the subconscious sphere. So that's where we're going to go. And so it's very juicy. The subconscious sphere is the operating system that never shuts off. Most of us have at least a cursory sense of, there's a level of awareness that informs our conscious mind. After all, we spend a lot of our lives in the dream state versus the waking state. So the two apertures, the two windows that represent a tremendous potential. Like there's just a tremendous potential for programming the subconscious, or the moments that you're waking up first thing in the morning, when you're in between sleeping and waking. It's called the hypnagogic state. So you're still, hypnagogic state, right? And you have, isn't that great? And you're having all this dream imagery, and you're sort of in between the levels between the veil. That's the point of the day where what we're doing in terms of thought, feeling, and emotion, or different practices, as you suggest, have tremendous potency. They become supercharged. Mm-hmm. Now, the second part of the day, so we have the first part, and then it's bookended by the back end of the day. So we have the bookend with the hypnagogic state in the morning and the hypnopompic state. So the aspect of the hypnopompic state is where you're, I'm sorry, I actually reversed them. The hypnopompic state is in the morning. Yeah, I'm sorry, I reversed them. Yeah.
I'm sitting here going, I think the hypnagogic state.
Yeah, I just realized one of those, like, little brain tricks there. Yeah. So with the hypnopompic state is when you're waking up, and you're still kind of trailing in the dream world. But the hypnagogic state is when you're going under. Mm-hmm. And those two little apertures are like where you can install information into the subconscious. And for instance, one of the tangible aspects to the subconscious sphere strategy that I share is making, for instance, it's really simple. You make a recording for yourself with your own voice that's based in whether it's affirmations or positive declarations, declarative statements that you would want to live by. Mm-hmm. And speaking of the subconscious, it knows the difference between, in other words, I like to think that it reads your bedroom voice really well. It reads like when you really mean what you're saying, mm-hmm. Versus like, I am free and unlimited, and you don't really believe, right? But if you can get yourself into a meditative state, and you get yourself into a state where you are in brain and heart coherence, then if you record those statements and play them back as you're falling asleep, say with earbuds, routinely, or even for a month, you're going to start making inroads in your subconscious. And that's the power behind the throne of the conscious mind.
That's wonderful. Suggestion and advice.
Thanks. Yeah, it's great. It's a lot of fun too. It's a lot of fun to work with it because it's so immediate. It's so turnkey. You'll see a huge difference. There's all kinds of processes, even with I spiritually coach and mentor people, and there's different processes that I put them through. It's not exactly that. We get to go on that journey, and it's fun. So it's not like, it's really an enjoyable process. But in that aspect of me being the personal trainer for somebody's soul, we often do what we call a letter to the universe. And that's kind of the same process where you're able to clarify your desires or what you're wanting, okay, which is really an important thing to articulate. And then you're articulating your values. Mm-hmm. And then you're also articulating who you choose to become. And there's a kind of alchemical formula of how you put those pieces together and make it work for you. Mm-hmm. So, the subconscious is our friend, and it's always knocking at the door. It's often giving us both the comfortable and uncomfortable feelings that ought to be paid attention to.
Yeah. I love that. I love those suggestions. And may I add something personal about?
Please, of course. Yeah.
May not be for everyone.
Sure.
But this is a process that I do. I'm a very lucid dreamer, and I travel, nice. And I have a lot of, when I'm intentional about healing different parts of my healing work, whatever I'm working with, in that hypnagogic state, before I go under, I have an awareness, and actually with the questioning of, show me what I need to learn, or take me to where I need to heal.
Very nice. Yeah. I like that.
Night. Yeah. I dream.
Yeah, that's great.
About people and situations and fears, and I'm working with my dreams to kind of unravel and process, like crying in the night or laughing in the night and feeling free, all that. And then when I get to that other stage in the morning, I can't say that word, the hypnopompic.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. Yeah.
When I get to that state in the morning, I try to become conscious, like hyper aware, but in that subtle, quiet time of what I just experienced in the dream state. And sometimes I'll take myself back in, and if I feel like I'm not finished, or
you mean back to the dream state, or back to the lucid state?
back to the dream state. Yeah.
Back to the dream state, right.
And then or I just take that moment, those pauses of those moments, and consciously reflect on the subconscious happenings in the dream. And it's been very helpful as a way to, I guess, process deeper aspects that need attention but aren't ready to, they're just easier for me to access that way. And I think some people can do that and may be helpful, and other people would sit here and go, I don't know what she's talking about. So but that's what I do.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, I think that's absolutely like germane to the process. That's like fundamental to empowerment. And it's such a nice way to approach it, because when we ask those open-ended questions, not only does the subconscious get busy, but the neocortex gets busy, that executive part of the brain, as we know. It really just starts going, it starts firing in very synchronous ways, and it starts organizing the catalog of knowledge and information that you have that equates with what you're wanting. Right. So basically it just gets mobilized towards that intention. It's such a great, simple way to launch that. And if I may add, it seems like you're also adding into the mix this sense of surrender, like you're having that conscious thought.
Yes.
But it sounds like you're very successfully, and I know this can be a challenge for people in the training wheel kind of stage, is to not get in your head. You launch the thought with great intention, but then that surrender back into that state of being where you're embracing the unknown takes you into the other parts of the brain, and kind of it takes you into the greater sense of being, more of the holistic self than just the analytical part of the noggin. So if you're dialing down that hyper analytical state, then you're basically training yourself to the lower, slower brainwave states, right? So you're keeping yourself more in a theta state if you don't start questioning, like, okay, I have this intention for an outcome, or intention for the highest good, or this knowledge that I need. What does it look like? How fast am I going to get it? What is it? If we have to get away from all of that and surrender like you're doing.
Well, I think that's why for me, the nighttime is a place I can do that so freely, because it almost puts me to sleep. It's like a prayer. It's, here we go into this new journey. And what do I want to see, or what do I need to see, and what do I need to feel and process? And then I can just let go and move into that state. And I love it there. Like I'd like to stay there.
Yeah.
No, I love it out here too.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of, as we know, we can sense this. We can sense the experience. For instance, as seekers, that consciousness has a continuity that is far less dualistic than we might imagine. Now, what do I mean by that? In other words, we think of like shamanic states, okay? You say, oh, the shaman or the wise woman is having her visions. Well, classically, that wasn't always with their eyes closed.
Right.
And that was one of the ways rather that I discovered that clairvoyance was functional and practical and could help myself and other people, was I realized that if I just placed my awareness into that kind of dream state, into that relaxed brainwave state, alpha state or lower, that the next thing I know, dream images were happening. So my experience is dreams are always happening, and I can tap into it whether I'm in the conscious state or unconscious state. And that's not exclusive to mystics or yogis or, healers. It actually is that's natural. That's our natural state of empowerment, really, as humans. That's our potential.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I would say too, as you just stated, when I do psychic readings for people, I always take them into a meditated, guided, and calling in the guides and so forth, but into that place together, to the surrender of what feels almost like a hypnotic state. Because for me, that's when I can really see, and where I can connect, and where I see with them. And I think for them, it's much easier for them to be open and surrender and relaxed. I've not been, so successful just, tell me what you want to know. Let me tell you what I see. I'm not that kind of person. I have to kind of go into it and meet there. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you speaking to that. That's interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds really rich. I mean, your experience sounds very rich, and it sounds like you're in a state of flow. You're in a state of ease with that, which is a huge accomplishment.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, Charley,
Yeah.
thank you so much for what you do. We could talk all day. I
Thank
know
you. Absolutely.
when we have
Yeah. Thank you,
like-minded
Leah.
spirits on board, but
Yeah. Total pleasure.
yes,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much. And we will all keep a lookout for your book, Expanding Your Spiritual Bandwidth, and
Yeah, thank you.
best always to your work and all the people that you reach organically.
That's right. That's
and
right.
technology,
Thank you,
and
Leah.
then through technology. So thank you
Yeah,
so much, Charley. It's been a
absolutely.
pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Leah.